And if you were looking for a justification, I haven't seen it in here as far as why did they raid his premises.
Right. And then no surprise that we did see a response from the former president on Truth Social. Let's take a look at what he said. Affidavit heavily redacted, nothing mentioned on nuclear, a total public relations subterfuge by the FBI and DOJ, or our close working relationship regarding document turnover. We gave them much. Judge Bruce Reinhart should never have allowed the break-in of my home. He recused himself 2 months ago from one of my cases based on his animosity and hatred of your favorite president, me. What changed? Why hasn't he recused himself on this case? Obama must be very proud of him right now.
Yeah, and joining us now to discuss, distinguished university professor at Touro College, Thane Rosenbaum, and host of America Right Now, Tom Basile. Let's look at this, Tom and Thane, to compare the Trump situation and the affidavit with Hillary Clinton and what we actually know came out of that. I don't know if we have this graphic that we can show you, but Mr. Trump and Tom, if you want to jump in here, I know you've taken a look at this, but on his side, 184 unique documents, 67 documents marked confidential, 92 documents marked as secret, 25 as top secret. Now look at the other side.
Yeah. So let's take a look at this, because one of the things that we found out in this whole lot of nothing that we were able to read today is that 159 of the 184 documents were either marked secret or confidential. So right there, you know that, by and large, and I've had a security clearance, I've had to conform to the records management rules of the federal government. Ordinarily, you're not going to have nuclear codes and stuff like that when it comes to secret or confidential documents. Now, Hillary Clinton.
Let's compare apples and oranges.
Yeah. So,
let's bring that back up.
Right, but
I want to compare that, a couple hundred to 30,000.
Yeah, but here's the big difference here. Is yes, she had a lot more, but she also didn't have the power to declassify them. Remember, if you're the head of an agency in the executive branch, you are only able to declassify things that you are the classifying authority for. So if in those 30,000 emails, she could have had information from the Defense Department, from the CIA. None of those things she would have the ability to declassify. But these 50 or 25 top secret documents, for instance, Donald Trump, being president at the time, would have had the ability to declassify because he has plenary ability to declassify from among all of the federal executive branch agencies. That's the big difference here.
And what we do know from this document, one of the things that it does show is a report from CBS in Miami that there were moving vans outside Mar-a-Lago on the 18th of January. Now, for them to have gotten there with documents, assuming that's what that was, he was still president, right?
Yeah.
Right.
The inauguration was on January 21st.
Right.
January 20th at noon.
Pardon me. Yeah.
Is when he left office, and he still has those abilities, has those powers right up until Joe Biden takes the oath.
Yeah, and it's interesting, Thane, I want to bring you in because we had Kash Patel on our show, I believe it was last week, and he said that all of these documents had been declassified at that time. What do you know about that? And is it even possible to declassify documents that quickly?
Look, Katrina, first of all, people keep forgetting, the president of the United States has a possessory interest in these documents anyway. He has an ownership interest. The Presidential Records Act was created to make sure that he recognizes that it really belongs to the public. But presidents have taken documents home, even if they're not declassified, right? I mean, I think I've heard Tom speak about this before, but the matter of intent matters a great deal here, right? It is a huge distinction. What was the president's intent, right? Is this the Rosenberg case we're talking about? That's why when you started to see the Justice Department invoking the Espionage Act, that intrigued a lot of people like me because they said, whoa, now, remember, the Presidential Records Act is not a criminal act. It's not a crime for the president to be negotiating with the archives people about what he wants to take home or she wants to take home and what they want him to take. The whole point was that this was supposed to be a negotiation. And by the way, Today's affidavit doesn't speak to that at all, right? At a minimum, it should have shown that the president of the United States was stonewalling them. He wasn't cooperating with them. He was holding back. And that's why, I mean, the president keeps saying, I'm negotiating with you. My own lawyer is negotiating. What was the fire? What was the emergency? So to me, some of the things that should never have been redacted if it was there is A, tell us about the negotiations with the president. Was the president cooperating or wasn't he cooperating? And two, you have an obligation to explain the justification for the search warrant. And if you can't justify it, why are you providing what you both have now shown us, a laughably heavily redacted document that shows nothing? To me,
I wanted to point something out here. If we can bring up
I was going to say one last thing, Bob. The magistrate yesterday had the ability to turn to the government and say, are you kidding me? Really? I can't show this to the public. This is nothing. He could have also taken it back and said, let me take a whack at this. He decided
no, he didn't. He punted on that one. He delayed it a week and then put out exactly what the DOJ gave him. But hang on a second, Tom, because I want to get your opinion on this. But I want to bring up that graphic, if we can, comparing the Trump affidavit to the Clinton emails, because we're talking about 30,000 emails, which contained 110 emails that were classified. 8 of those chains contained information that was top secret. 36 chains contained secret information, 8 chains confidential information. Now, if we all remember back, James Comey, as I recall, essentially wiped this clean and said there was no criminal intent. Maybe I'm misremembering, but as I recall, that was his justification, Tom. So is that necessary in this case, any criminal intent, even if these had not been declared
well, look,
unclassified?
in my view, the fact that she went out of her way to put these on a separate server
shows intent?
Shows some degree of intent. When you're leaving an administration and you're boxing up stuff to leave from the White House, and GSA is putting these boxes together and they're transporting them, and we're talking about 25 documents out of thousands of documents, hundreds of boxes, a whole moving vans full of stuff that left the White House on its way down to Mar-a-Lago. I think that the government has a much higher bar to be able to show that not only was there intent, but there was a threat to national security from these boxes, which, by the way, when they're at Mar-a-Lago, they're protected by the United States Secret Service. They're not just floating around the golf club. You know, these are in places that are protected, that are in secure areas. Now, maybe they're not authorized to be presidential records rooms, all right, and that may be what they use to get the probable cause. But this suggestion on the part of the DOJ that this unprecedented inflammatory step needed to be taken because somehow the country was imperiled by it is really a stretch. One of the things that Thane brought up.
We got to take a break.
Yeah.
If you don't mind hanging on.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
I'm here.
Okay.
All right. Tom Vasili and Thane Rosenbaum, thanks so much.
Well, they're staying with us, but we'll continue to discuss. All right, we continue with our top story today as the Justice Department has released a heavily redacted version of the affidavit used for the FBI raid of Mar-a-Lago. Page after page. This is just a depiction. I think it's what, Tom? 38
pages.
38 pages, Katrina. And then most of that, overwhelming majority, redacted. It's been reported that even the section explaining the redactions has redactions.
All right. Along with Tom and Thane, who are joining us again, we are welcoming in founding partners of law firm DeGeneva and Tensing, Joe Geneva and Victoria Tensing. Thanks for joining us. Let's dive right back in here. Thane, I want to get your thought. We didn't really give you an opportunity to respond specifically to the comparison that we had shared of what was taken from the former president's home in Mar-a-Lago to what Hillary Clinton had in terms of email. So let's just start here. Your response to this. I think a lot of critics or cynics might say, well, sure, but he was the president and she wasn't. So shouldn't we be looking more closely at what a former president had?
Well, Katrina, yes. In fact, he's the president, which is exactly the point Tom was making before. He is empowered to declassify those documents if he wished to. I am of the view that even if he didn't declassify them, unless there is evidence of him destroying it or disseminating it or sharing it with a foreign entity, I just don't think you prosecute a president. You certainly don't put him to jail for this. This is what, especially given the comparison that you're pointing to. But remember, there's another case that's operating today, the civil case that the president brought in order to appoint a special master to review the documents. And this graphic that you're showing me, Katrina, is evidence of why he wants a special master. Because he's saying, look at this comparison. Why would I trust the FBI or the Justice Department to rifle through my personal effects and my documents that I created while I was in the White House? Why should I possibly remember the Mueller investigation that was based on the Steele dossier? They didn't even, the FBI didn't even, in fact, do its own original investigation. So it's interesting that you're showing me this graphic because to me, it's evidence that should be used today in the argument that the president's lawyer is seeking to say, look, there has to be a special master appointed here because look at this graphic itself demonstrates that I have a very bad history with the FBI and I have no reason to trust them. I was cooperating with the National Archives people, and the next thing you know, there's an executed search warrant to go through my personal office and take out things that are personal to me that could be subject to attorney-client privilege or executive privilege. So I want to stop it and let a special master review.
Yeah, let's bring in Joe and Victoria. It looks like the magistrate punted for a week and then took exactly what the DOJ gave him and released that. Am I reading that wrong?
No, this little Nebish, who is this magistrate judge, really has shown himself to be not ready for prime time. He talked a lot about all of his fears and this and that and the other thing, and then he just basically rubber stamps the government submission. He was never going to do anything else. He was drawing attention to himself in order to dramatize his role. I think, regrettably, this redacted affidavit creates more problems and raises more questions than it answers. But it also raises the more serious question, under no circumstances should there ever have been a search warrant at a former president's home. The government should have gone in if it was having problems, asked for a hearing on the grand jury subpoena. It would have been a secret hearing. They could have had their questions answered, and an order to compel could have been issued by the federal judge.
Yeah, by the way, very quickly, Victoria, we wanted to explain to people what's on the screen. The president, the current president, by the way, Joe Biden, heading up to Wilmington, there, Marine One, obviously. We'll continue to track that if there's any news that comes out of it. That's what we're looking at right now. Victoria, go ahead. Finish your thought, please.
Yes, I just got off the phone with a member of the Trump legal team, and I was told that on June 3rd, the FBI went to Mar-a-Lago and they went through all the documents that were there. And they said, things are good, but we'll get back to you. And the next day, they got back to them and said, oh, you better put a better lock on it. June 5th, the better lock was put on. And the team had never heard from anybody in the government since that day, since June 4th, when they said put a better lock on it. So what Joe was saying, I want to reiterate, the Justice Department, Merrick Garland got up there and said, we use the least intrusive method possible to get information. No, no, no. That's called going to court if there's a problem, communicating with the lawyers, not issuing a search warrant. But it seems to be that a search warrant is the Department of Justice's weapon of choice these days.
Yeah, and Tom, I know that you have some things to add to this, so I'll just let you take it away.
Yeah, sure. And to Victoria's point, on June 8th, and if you look at this document, page 22, page 23, on June 8th, the Department of Justice counsel sent a note to the counsel to former President Trump saying, you know, it needs to be in a secure location, authorized for the storage of classified information, and that goes on. They include that, but Then they redacted the Trump counsel's response to the Department of Justice. So we're not really getting the Trump side of the story here.
Can you show that page?
It's all blacked out.
Show where that is.
So this is,
as we showed this,
2023. So this is the DOJ communication, and this is the Trump lawyers' communication back to the Department of Justice with some sort of explanation. And why this is important is because they're going to really try to hang their hat, I believe, on obstruction of justice. And so I think, you know, the Trump folks are very concerned about the fact that so much of this is heavily redacted. They have this letter. Maybe they should consider releasing the letter
Could they
to
release it?
DOJ. Absolutely, if they wanted to.
even if they violated what the tenets were that was at the beginning of the document, where they say we don't want to release people's information on certain people.
Well, I mean, they could certainly, if there
have
were
a couple
names,
redactions here.
have some redactions.
Yeah.
But basically, you know, we've been talking for months about how, with the January 6th committee, the Trump side of the story has not been given an opportunity to have a hearing. Well, here, in the way that DOJ redacted this, the Trump side of the story is also not been presented to the public at all. So this is something that the president and his attorneys probably could control, because they obviously had a communication with DOJ as that negotiation was going on, and I think that it would be very informative to try and figure out, you know, to get that information.
Yeah, so there's more that we potentially could be seeing, but from the Trump side.
Right.
All right, team, thanks so much. Joe and Victoria, thanks for being with us, and of course, Tom and Thane. All right, and coming up, former advisor to Donald Trump, Peter Navarro, joining us to discuss the big news of the day, of course.